The Ethereum ETF just got approved. Well, you know why it got approved? It got approved because President Trump had an event in Mar-a-Lago and said, if you want crypto to be a thing in the US, you should vote for me. It went viral. His team has been very engaged. The campaign has been very engaged. And all of a sudden, this became an issue that the Biden team realized is going to swing hundreds of thousands of voters at least. And this goes to my original point. There was a lot of folks that are either centrists or politically disengaged because they're very focused on this concept in tech of exit, right? Your ability to just stop arguing in DC, get me the hell away from DC. Let me just build a better alternative and a better future using technology. We don't care. DC can play their DC games. What the strategic error was from the Biden administration is just scoffing or laughing or saying, yeah, these are a bunch of kids and criminals and they're going to take what they get. You know, I'm a dad. I have 4 kids. You get what you get. You don't get upset. Right? Like, that's kind of the way that they've treated us in this like really patronizing way over the last few years. And I don't think until a couple of weeks ago that they really understood just how many people they have pissed off for no reason. None.
Howdy, everyone, and welcome back to Moment of Truth, the podcast of American Moment. My name is Saurabh Sharma. I'm the president of American Moment, and this week it is just me with a real treat today as far as guests go. Today we had on Ryan Selkis, who is the co-founder and CEO of Messari. But before I get to that, be sure as always to go to AmericanMoment.org. There you can find everything we have cooking as an organization, including the backlog of this podcast, programs that we have upcoming. AM Fridays is having record attendance on a weekly basis. You can go to AmericanMoment.org/AM Fridays and fill out that form to join us for lunch every Friday on Capitol Hill, Box Chick-fil-A, to hear from some of the foundational public policy speakers of our time on a whole variety of issues. But anyway, today we had on Ryan Selkis, who is the co-founder and CEO of Messari, a leading crypto asset data and research company. Prior to founding Messari, he was an entrepreneur in residence at ConsenSys and was on the founding teams of Digital Currency Group, where he managed the firm's seed investing activity, and CoinDesk, where he led the company's restructuring and annual ConsenSys conferences. He has been an investor and prolific writer in the crypto industry since 2013. We're big fans of crypto here at American Moment. Some of our biggest supporters love to donate via crypto. If you'd like to, you can go to our website at AmericanMoment.org/donate. But I really wanted to have Ryan on because he's been very, very aggressive in carving out a lane in politics for why crypto advocates should be more engaged, and specifically more engaged supporting the right. He has been involved in supporting President Trump lately, very publicly endorsed him, and really believes that right-leaning policymakers are crypto's only hope to ensure that it has a future in the country. So we talked about that, his political evolution, and what the crypto industry wants, who's Gary Gensler, why is he Satan, and much, much more. He also peeled back the curtain on some of the mafia mob-style tactics going on behind the scenes to really pressure people who attended that David Sachs fundraiser or are supporting the right in general. There's some really dark, disgusting stuff going on. And so if you'd like to get a peek behind the curtain of the blue wall in tech, as he calls it, then be sure to stay to the end, including some great stuff in the members only segment. In case you've forgotten, you can become a member on YouTube, either a truther or a statesman, and get the episodes 24 hours early, as well as bonus content. In today's, we talked about what his plans are if Biden wins re-election and what's going to happen to the crypto industry, as well as some other fun stuff about how Silicon Valley really works. So we'll go now to Ryan Selkis. Ryan, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's a great joy of my life to find people saying crazy stuff on Twitter and bring them on this show. So thank you for being in a long lineage of people I've found that way. Would love to hear a little bit about your background, obviously in the business world. And that is obviously an important antecedent to what brought you to politics. How did you become the Ryan Selkis people know today?
Well, honestly, probably through my Twitter alter ego. So I'm sure we'll spend a bit of time talking about that. I'm from upstate New York originally, went to Boston College, was in Boston for about 10 years, started in venture capital and investment banking. So kind of like traditional, finance background. And then after a few years in venture capital, decided I wanted to be on the other side of the phone calls that I'd been doing. And I've always just had the entrepreneurial itch, which I think is like overwrought. Like I don't recommend that people follow their passion and follow what they're good at. But I am a little bit of a misfit, and I don't necessarily always take direction that well. So I knew that I wanted to just kind of scratch that itch and come from a family of entrepreneurs, right? Small business owners, but entrepreneurs. And so I started a company in 2012, basically focused on charitable payments. And I won't go into that full, saga, but it took 2 years for the IRS to get us our exempt status.
Wow.
For the critical account that we needed in order to operate this business. And so we won a couple of business plan competitions, but we never launched because we didn't have the legal structure to do it. And I also think it was premature. But as I was winding it down, I actually got very fortunate in that I had gotten into business school, but the summer accelerator program that I was in went through October. And I wound down the company, of course, in early October, and I had just deferred business school for a year. I was going to go to Sloan in Cambridge, MIT. And so all of a sudden I have 10 months on my hand, and I'd been kind of dabbling, like curious about Bitcoin for a couple of years, but I had finally purchased it over the summer, and then it just starts going vertical. So that basically the weekend that
fall of 2012,
fall of 2013, 2012, we'd be having a different conversation.
Yeah.
We'd be on my yacht, but so it's a difference a year makes. But I basically had 10 months on my hand. It was a very early industry, not enough time to get another job. It scratched all the right itches for me, kind of libertarian type of, Rand Paul, kind of libertarian philosophy. And I've always been kind of very politically oriented, but for me, it was a way to actually build an alternative versus just shout into the void, which is what most libertarians do. And that kind of very quickly became, I think, a core contingent and part of like the crypto movement early on that DNA still exists today. And we'll get back into why that's important in terms of things that I've been doing politically. But that kind of early journey led me to writing daily. I created a daily newsletter that became pretty popular because I broke the Mt. Gox story back in 2013, which is this big bankruptcy of this large Japanese exchange. At the time, I think it was the biggest story ever, probably, arguably only second to the collapse of FTX, which I also may have had something to do with, just having been across the table, kind of working against Sam on some of the political things he was trying to shove down our throats in the fall of 2022. But that basically information background, that kind of analyst background, led me to Digital Currency Group, big investment manager. And then we acquired CoinDesk. I went back to the analyst, kind of media personality type in resuscitating that business. And then when I left in 2017, started my current company, Messari, which basically has created a private version of Edgar for crypto. So you can think about it, the X for Y comparison would be like a Bloomberg for crypto. But it really is almost.
Does that annoy you when people say Bloomberg for crypto?
No, I think it's accurate. But I think that what's interesting about what we've built is you essentially collapse information reporting that you'd expect to see in public filings, a la 10Ks, 10Qs, S1s, and we basically build it on a modern stack and with modern tools so that it's easier for people to navigate. And so it looks like some combination. But my point and my thesis early on was before you build Bloomberg, you need data standards. So you need to build Edgar first and those type of information reporting standards. And then you can essentially have this product that is not only helpful for people to navigate, but ultimately, as we get into the intersection of policy and crypto, which will happen if this industry professionalizes and matures, which it has, you're going to need some type of information reporting standards. And it's not.
Was it like pulling teeth to get the degens to listen to you on that?
No, because disclosures are not required for open networks, right? So you think about like it's almost like the relationship between investor relations and audit functions are flipped, right? Public company goes public. They have an internal finance team. They prepare the filings. Ernst & Young, PwC will audit their filings and make sure that they've got clean books. In these open networks, you can actually, as a third party, look directly at the blockchain, look directly at the governance forums, look directly at all the activity that's happening on Twitter and like this, mess of where information lives in these networks and their communities. And you can aggregate all of it and then push it out and then essentially have mechanisms to collect feedback from the rest of the ecosystem if something is inaccurate or, it needs to be corrected. So it's like the audit almost comes from the community,
right,
and the information reporting can come from third parties, which is fundamentally different. And so that's a little bit of a difficult concept to grasp, particularly for policymakers that are used to the 90-year-old securities regulations and laws. And so I've kind of known from day one, hey, eventually when the laws are written, eventually when the regulations get written and the rules of the road are defined, this is going to be a pretty big education gap for us to get public policy right. And unfortunately, internationally, there's a lot of regulators that get this, that are light years ahead of the U.S., whether you're talking about the Middle East, Singapore, UK, MiCA, and basically the European
in a pro-crypto direction, not an anti-crypto.
Well, I think in a more educated direction.
Yeah.
Right. The bureaucrat, their bureaucrats are better than ours.
Mm-hmm.
Is the way that I'd put it. Or their bureaucrats are allowed to be better than ours.
Yeah.
If you think like I do, that Gary Gensler is just the most corrupt person in the U.S. government. But we'll get into that. So I think. Company is, over 100 people, we've got hundreds of customers. We're kind of, right on the pulse of, I think, what needs to be done and what needs to be offered to protect investors, to prevent additional, fraud and abuse, and make sure that people are able to speculate with a full hand and they're able to kind of understand what they're getting into. But at least creating like the permission structure for people to at least feel confident that they're going to be able to come in, and if they invest in a community or they participate or they kind of technically integrate with a community, that they're not just going to be defrauded or rugged as crypto Twitter calls it. So that's kind of where we are today. But I can zoom in or out on that story or talk about the politics around it.
So. Crypto, it sounds like, was a channel for political instincts that were sort of being unmet for you in the early 2010s, and things have now come full circle, and crypto is what's bringing you back to politics, it sounds like.
Yeah, the politics came to me.
Yeah, the politics came to you. Tell me that story. What was that glass-breaking moment where you realized not only yourself, but the entire crypto industry needs to become much more political quickly?
That actually gets to our mutual friend. Josh reached out, who I know, Josh Steinman, was one of the best episodes, one of the best podcasts that I've listened to, period. So
he's great.
Your listeners should definitely double click on that one, because I'd say it's a top 10 that I've listened to, period. But he actually reached directly out to me in August of 2021. It was right after the disastrous Afghanistan withdrawal and then the passing of the infrastructure bill, where this was kind of like a seismic, event within crypto. It didn't register, I'm sure, anywhere else. But essentially, there was last minute language and kind of addendums that essentially just used crypto as a pay for in the infrastructure bill. And the language was totally unworkable and would essentially capture and centralize many aspects of the industry, or would make it just technically impossible to comply with these with this language.
Sorry, what exactly were these provisions?
It was essentially like tax reporting provisions, so that Congress or the CBO essentially scored it and said, hey, if we just tighten up tax compliance within the crypto industry and we close all these loopholes, then that'll be $28 billion that we can apply, right? So it was kind of this gimmicky accounting trick, but the language was almost like intentionally clumsy to rein in more of the decentralized aspects of the industry. It caused an uproar. It basically put, I think it put crypto on the map in DC because of how ferocious the backlash was and how many calls senators were getting and congressmen and how much media there was. And it ultimately came down to one senator that blocked the amendment, Shelby from Alabama, who then retired, who's got very close banking industry ties, and essentially, just It had to be a unanimous consent amendment, and he stood up as the single person against it. And so, we got the language that we got, and we ended up getting, I think, like a colloquy that said what the intent of the language was, just to be able to at least reference that back to that. But at that point, the die was cast, and a bunch of executives and lawyers in the industry, got together at my conference, Messari's conference, Mainnet, a month later in New York, and we essentially had an event at the event focused on policy. And the punchline was, we have to get our together, because this doesn't happen to the bank lobby. Yeah. This doesn't happen to telecom, right? This only happens when they can just kick you in the teeth and move on and say, like, whatever, kids, doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. And that was, I think, really the birth of a lot of political organization and 0 to 100 miles per hour up leveling in terms of political sophistication. That's when, Josh had seen some of my tweets expressing displeasure with how things were evolving over the summer. And then we were able to slowly kind of build a small army of folks that were a little bit more politically savvy and get a game plan together over the course of the last few years.
So just to get ahead of people's natural thoughts, people hear crypto activity in Washington, and there's one thing that pops up into their head, the schlubby guy with the big hair, Sam Bankman-Fried, who was rolling around town, throwing around a ton of cash for the last few years. Give the, insider's view of what was so sinister of what Sam Bankman-Fried was doing. How did your friends in the industry view his activity at the time, even when they may not have been saying as much? Mm-hmm. You were more vocal. What was the read on it? Did everyone know he was a fraud? What was going on?
Well, I'll just say personally, I hope within the next couple of years, people view me as the anti-Sam Bankman-Fried. And that's certainly the investment of time and energy and money that I've personally made, just because I feel, not like I should be centrally controlling these conversations, but happen to sit in a unique position where I do have that kind of political itch and that, kind of background and kind of, more missionary approach to this industry versus mercenary on the one hand, but also I'm well incentivized with my company to make sure that the entire industry succeeds, because we sell to the big exchanges, we sell to the big investors, we sell to the TradFi firms that will come in, but we also need hundreds or thousands of these decentralized networks to exist if you're going to pay for a subscription to the Bloomberg of crypto, right? Yeah. So
diversity in the industry is baked into your business model.
Exactly, right? So like we do well when the rising tide truly lifts all boats and there's no regulatory capture. Mm-hmm. Sam, on the other hand, was sprinting to basically lobby for a bill and language that would create regulatory capture and essentially give his business outsized influence over the cryptocurrency market and almost like a monopoly on U.S. activity. So that's why he was spending other people's money all around town, trying to create this influence game where he'd be able to surround sound DC, and he's got the crazy hair, and he wants to give all of his wealth away, and effective altruism, and there's a rule of thumb that I have, which is anyone that is that outlandish about wanting to give all their money away should be trusted never. Right? Yeah. Because what do you do if you actually create wealth for yourself, for your team, for your investors? You reinvest it because you're good at it. And that's much more effective than giving it to NGOs or, basically, trying to just like donate it to a bunch of charities instead of kind of reinvesting, reaccumulating. I mean, Elon Musk is the perfect counterexample, right? He's not giving away his fortune to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Mm-hmm. They do a bunch of great stuff, but instead he's trying to go to Mars. He's saving free speech. Mm-hmm. He's building electric cars. He's obviously very controversial.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. His executive comp package is basically the same size as the purchase price of Twitter. So it's like 45 billion, 44 billion. Yeah, it's like right about the same.
Fortuitous, right? But I think someone reminded me, because obviously when there's a collapse like that, there's a tendency for everybody to Monday morning quarterback and say like, oh, well, we kind of turned a blind eye, but I knew that he was sketchy. But one of my teammates, one of my colleagues bailed me out, and he actually said it for me on Twitter, basically saying, I think Selkis was one of the only people that told me he didn't trust Sam Bankman-Fried. And he literally took a screenshot of like an internal conversation with the timestamp that we had. And that had kind of colored my impression of him and this kind of handle with care mentality. But at the same time, all of us in the industry were looking at what he was doing here and the love fest for him here. And so you're like, okay, he's got all this influence. He is making some forward progress. He is getting in the right rooms with right influential people. Maybe we can draft off of that and make sure that good language is proposed and not just sellout language.
Right.
So it was this really kind of delicate dance throughout, the end of 2022 to, essentially, in some respects, cut him at the knees when they were willing to compromise on language that no one else wanted. And that ultimately, I think, set off the domino that led to his undoing, because, one of the things that he was doing was he was talking a lot of smack about CZ from Binance and basically throwing him under the bus, even though they had been kind of early business partners. And then CZ just said enough is enough. And he basically threatened to dump all of his holdings. And I don't think he realized just how bad the fraud was. I think that he just wanted to commercially punish someone that was basically stabbing.
He thought it was going to be a haircut. He didn't realize it'd be a decapitation.
He didn't realize it would set off this whole chain of events, right? And so I think that morning when FTX went under, we just all knew that like a nuke went off and it was going to be a dark 18 months. But at the same time, it didn't change any of the kind of core convictions that anyone had in the market and the tech itself. It was a classic financial fraud. So in that respect, it was almost a little bit of a relief, right? Because, this was QuickBooks fraud. This was not like Machiavellian, like inserting malicious code into this library that, all of a sudden sets off this chain reaction. So it wasn't
unsupported
anything,
stable coins or any of that stuff. It wasn't any of that.
Exactly. Well, and but I think we can get into some of the policy that I think is fair and reasonable. I think what's different, where I try to be a pragmatic libertarian or, a red-leaning person who wants to win elections is like another way to put it, because libertarians don't win anything. And so I do think that there's some pretty obvious areas where good policy would be net helpful for the industry. It also wouldn't, sell out the industry, the future of this technology or any of the core values that underpin it.
So let's get to what the Biden administration has been doing to you guys. And I want to start it with a framing question.
It's actually the Liz Warren administration, if we're talking about the financial regulators.
on crypto especially. One of the challenges that I always put to my crypto friends when they complain about the federal government coming after them is that when you spent 10 years talking about how the entire point of Bitcoin is to destroy nation states and replace the financial system, you then can't be mad that nation states and the financial system are coming after you. What do you make of that argument and that, the degens had it coming? And then what has the Biden administration been doing?
It's a great question. And it actually dovetails pretty well with a comment that I get a lot about President Trump. And essentially, we'll get into my support of President Trump in a minute, why I think it's just night and day between him and Biden, but I think this helps draw the contrast. One of the primary critiques is, well, neither team is really good, because on the way out the door, Steve Mnuchin tried to shank us with this 11th hour rule from Treasury that essentially would have banned self-custody. Basically, your ability to control your own private keys. It would have intermediated all crypto financial activity. It didn't go through. We squashed it. It was probably unconstitutional, but he did try to do it on the way out. So people look at that and they say, well, the Trump administration was no friend of Bitcoin. And what I say is, you got to look at the moment in time. When Trump was in office, it was 2017 to 2021. From election day 2016 to Biden's inauguration, we went from $13 billion to $1 trillion in market cap under Trump. So
Is it really that? Wow. 13 billion to $1 trillion.
Yeah, so I was a high school basketball player. I wasn't very good. I was more of an enforcer. But we have a saying in basketball, ball don't lie, right?
Yeah.
We went up 100x under President Trump. He had some very fair, laissez-faire, but fair regulators. Hester Peirce, Christian Carlo were literally called crypto mom and crypto dad. Brian Brooks, who ran the OCC on an interim basis, was the chief legal officer at Coinbase before he joined late in the administration. So we had some good folks there, but this issue always comes up. And to go back to your question, it was especially because of that you had some of the negative language from Trump in terms of some of the tweets that he had. I don't like Bitcoin. I like the US dollar. That was a reaction to what at the time was the lion's share of the industry. And like early on, it was very libertarian, very crypto anarchist. And we were kind of in that graduation phase over the course of the last 6 years into a much bigger tent community. So that was, I think, very much a reaction to the fact that there weren't really any other applications. There was 2 applications at that point. There was Bitcoin, which was store of value. We're coming for all your fiat currencies. Hide your kids, hide your wife, right? And then there was this glut of ICOs, initial coin offerings that were essentially like this wild speculative phase in the Ethereum ecosystem in 2017, and then a crash in 2018. So those just, we have to be honest, that was the speculation phase of a lot of application developments that now I think has borne fruit, and you can see a lot of legitimate applications, whether you're talking about decentralized social media, decentralized payments, lending, the entire DeFi ecosystem, if you will. There's physical infrastructure that's secured using these networks now. So it just took time to build because we were literally going from 0 to 1. Mm-hmm. And I think what is different this time around with President Trump is his team is getting very good advice, and they're absorbing it, and they're listening, and they're reacting to a different set of circumstances because we are 6 years, 7 years later than when they last looked at this. And you can see how much has been built. Now you contrast that with the Biden administration, or again, the Liz Warren administration, and there's no excuse except for the fact that they would like outright control and surveillance capabilities of tech and finance. And I say the Liz Warren administration because everybody knows, I'm sure, listeners for this podcast will certainly be familiar, but the devil's bargain in 2020 for Liz Warren's endorsement was she wants control of all the financial regulators, or at least, a say. And if you look at throughout the administration, whether it's the FDIC with Marty Gruenberg, the SEC with Gensler is the worst example, the NEC, the Treasury, like throughout every single one of these financial regulators, her former staffers or allies are everywhere. Perfect example of this guy, Bharat Ramamurthy, one of the most dangerous people and under the radar, but most dangerous adversaries that we've had in the Biden administration, former Warren staffer. He resigned in September. I want to give you a guess as to who replaced him.
Who replaced him?
Liz Warren's chief of staff.
There you go.
So, it's a straight revolving door from that office, and people that underestimate Warren do so at their own peril because she never passes any bills, but she essentially runs the economy right now. Mm-hmm. And I think if you look at Liz Warren, there's a very famous ad that she had run with, her team had run with, saying basically at the very market bottom post FTX, that she was going to build an anti-crypto army. And the Trump campaign seized on that and has now said that they're building a crypto army. Yeah. Right. So that's the contrast that I think is not only campaign tactics, but I think legitimately a black and white issue. Mm-hmm. And that's what's creating so much inner turmoil for left-leaning, or progressive folks within the industry that understand that this is a tool for this tech can be used for economic empowerment, banking the unbanked, inclusion, all the progressive causes. And younger representatives like Richie Torres, they get this too. They cross the aisle on some of these issues because they understand the opportunity, and they're pulling their hair out because the administration and some of the senior senators and senior staff and senior folks even on the House side, like Maxine Waters, are looking in Liz Warren's direction for guidance because this just isn't on their radar. And part of it is a generation divide, but part of it is also just there's deference to her. And you have a fundamentally different vision of what you want the future of the country to be. And, you know, I just don't see that changing, regardless of whatever you might hear from the Biden administration in you know, the next few months, which is basically just a reaction to Trump's involvement and you know, kind of endorsement of the industry.
So I'm a big believer in politics. If you have an enemy, they need a face and a name. And Liz Warren and the legislature seems like the ones you guys have identified. And I think one thing that shows cleverness on behalf of the crypto industry is you guys have found one in the executive branch as well, Gary Gensler. Who is Gary Gensler and why is he Satan?
How much tape do you have?
Plenty.
I have on my desk a 200-page Oppo research pack. Literally 200-page Oppo research pack on Chair Gensler, and it's a year old. So you could probably add another 200 pages just based on his behavior in the last year. Everything that the SEC has done under his guidance with respect to the crypto industry has been in bad faith, challenged in the courts, and successfully overturned. Just doublespeak, out of control, side door rulemaking, anything that they can do to possibly cripple the growth and trajectory of the industry and essentially punish anyone that dissents. They've gone after Kraken, they've gone after Coinbase, they've gone after every single one of the biggest players in the industry. The only one that they didn't go after, of course, was FTX. They missed that one. Oops. So, I mean, he's incompetent. He's corrupt. He was Rep. Byron Donalds actually brought this up in one of the oversight hearings. But he was the campaign CFO for Hillary Clinton that wrote the checks for the Steele dossier that they basically were fined for and got a slap on the wrist. Essentially the same election fraud that we just saw the sham trial about in New York, but a much more egregious version of it because they actually funded the Steele dossier, which was just
an order of crime that would ban you from like running money on Wall Street, but he regulates all of it now.
But now suddenly, you know, the most detail-oriented, notoriously vindictive person in the U.S. regulatory sphere just suddenly has a fuzzy memory as to whether he signed off on that check. I'm skeptical. So for a while, I've been outspoken about how horrible he is since 2021, and that's not a very popular position to be in if you're an operating CEO. You're supposed to be a little bit more diplomatic. You're supposed to be respectful, and I am when people are operating in good faith. I always try to be.
Yeah, you said
even when I disagree. Yeah, I said. Well, I see. I'm getting better in my old age because I used to call him Golden Gary, and it stuck for a while, but now I've deferred to Chair Gensler. I think he's just done a tremendous disservice to the SEC. Again, the nature of my business, we should be almost best friends with the SEC. Yeah. We're building tools that
you're
are
trying to
actually help them do
and regularize the industry.
Building tools that will actually help them fulfill their mandate to protect investors, ensure the markets are fair and efficient, and promote capital formation. That's my mission. Like that's my company. That's our team's mission. But the difference is we are operating in good faith. They are operating in bad faith. And it's really it's come at the behest of Liz Warren's political priorities to centralize control and oversight of all financial transactions, and Chair Gensler's just insatiable quest for power to become Treasury Secretary, which, if I can pat myself on the back for one thing,
I don't think that's going to happen.
It's never going to happen. And I'd like to think that I played at least a top 5 role in helping destroy his career. So I'm sure the SEC will at some point try to shank me on the way out. Because that's what they do. And I think he's the most corrupt person in the U.S. government, which is, that's a high bar in this administration, but I do believe it's true.
So pro-Biden crypto people, such that they exist, or maybe just people who are unaware, they would say, well, you got your Bitcoin ETF approved, and it looks like there's some movement on Ether. Like
that took years of lawsuits.
I agree, but explain why. Like What's the BS narrative that the Biden administration will paint for why they actually are pro crypto, and why is it not all that?
Well, they're gonna point to FTX and they're gonna say we're trying to protect people. There's no clear rules. Congress, give us something to work with.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, the regulators are going to basically write rules according to the existing laws, and that's what the executive branch, has the authority to do.
Mm-hmm.
We've challenged them repeatedly in court about this, and they'll point to these things that, if you're not paying attention, that is the perception. Oh, well, what's the big deal? Bitcoin ETF got approved this January. Of course, they're going to regulate this. Look at FTX. Look at all the crazy, stories that we see in the New York Times. The Ethereum ETF just got approved. Well, you know why it got approved? It got approved because President Trump had an event in Mar-a-Lago and said, if you want crypto to be a thing in the US, you should vote for me. It went viral. His team has been very engaged. The campaign has been very engaged. And all of a sudden, this became an issue that the Biden team realized is going to swing hundreds of thousands of voters at least. And this goes to my original point. There was a lot of folks that are either centrists or politically disengaged because they're very focused on this concept in tech of exit, right? Your ability to just stop arguing in DC, get me the hell away from DC. Let me just build a better alternative and a better future using technology. We don't care. DC can play their DC games. What the strategic error was from the Biden administration is just scoffing or laughing or saying, these are a bunch of kids and criminals and they're going to take what they get. I'm a dad. I have 4 kids. You get what you get. You don't get upset, right? Like, that's kind of the way that they've treated us in this really patronizing way over the last few years. And I don't think until a couple of weeks ago that they really understood just how many people they have pissed off for no reason. None.
And don't 100 million Americans have crypto or exposure? Yeah,
but that's not going to, if you have $100 in Coinbase, that's not going to make or break your vote. Yeah. I'm talking about the real zealots, either folks like me that are just very politically aligned and just kind of believe in this technology and what it does for civil liberties and enshrining civil liberties in the global financial system for one thing, but just, you've got, it protects speech. It's almost like a defense tech versus AI. It's about privacy rights. It's about due process and automated code that can't be manipulated by the U.S. courts. Decentralization is kind of like the 10th Amendment, right? You can look at half the Bill of Rights and you can see values from the Bill of Rights like at the very foundation of crypto. And whether it's folks that have an outsized financial interests in the industry, or it's people that are just philosophically very passionate about this, the intersection is hundreds of thousands of swing voters, maybe millions, but certainly hundreds of thousands. And I think it's rising every day because they are doubling and tripling down on everything that's been basically poking us in the eye for the last couple of years. And now it's just much more egregious because it's risen the level of presidential politics.
So lay out for me what the crypto community's response to this looks like right now. How is everyone organized? People have seen stuff probably about Fair Shake. What's that? Who are the players? Is there a smoke-filled room that all of you guys are planning everything? Please break some news if there is. Or is it more decentralized like the industry itself?
I don't get invited. I don't get invited anymore to any of the smoke-filled rooms because people, I think at this point, view me as like the Omar Little of crypto policy. So, which is not unfair. And I take it as a compliment and aspire to be such. But I think there's loose coordination and there's general alignment in the right direction. We are, I think as an industry, fortunate to have some of the most influential folks like Andreessen, like Paradigm and like Coinbase with Brian Armstrong in particular, relatively well aligned and incentivized to grow the entire pie. So the surface area for regulatory capture, I think, is lower than it was when we were talking about the Stabenow-Boozman bill, or the FTX bill, as I like to call it, in 2022. So I think the decision making, as you put it, there is no such thing. It's like siblings and the island of misfit toys, kind of arguing with each other over the details. But at least in public, the big thing that has changed is we've got our together in terms of like a public perception, and we have professional policy operative, folks that have been in DC for a long time, that know how to get policy passed, that know how to play the political game. And we have a balanced effort alongside any of the other most powerful lobbies in DC at this point, because we have the C4s, we've got the super PAC with $160 million in it now.
It's crazy.
That puts the fear of God, and it should, because we're going to take out Sherrod Brown, John Tesser, hopefully Jackie Rosen, and Bob Casey as well.
Does that make it the biggest non-presidential campaign super PAC in the country?
I think so. Yeah.
That's amazing.
And I'm happy. I'm happy that we had put in, I think, our $5,000 or whatever. Just from I've helped them with a number of introductions and kind of been just banging the drum on Fair Shake for a couple of years. But we were a small contributor as well. So just to get our name in the press release.
Yeah.
So, but I think that. There's another organization, Stand with Crypto, that's focused on like voter activation, kind of, creating a scorecard for candidates.
Every time I open my Coinbase app, it takes like 3 seconds to play the little animation.
Well, there's 1 million folks that have signed up through Stand with Crypto now. And so, you're seeing the raw voter numbers, you're seeing the donor figures, you're seeing the public disclosures in terms of how much is now aimed at the Senate. Not just in getting kind of generation change and pro-crypto folks in the House, but actually taking out incumbents in the Senate now. That's exciting, because we are not going to be taken seriously as an industry until we've taken a couple of folks out, in my opinion. And I think the primary area of disagreement between me and some of my colleagues, which is why I don't get invited to the smoke-filled rooms anymore, is because I think the die is cast. It's over, right? The Senate needs to go as red as possible to send a message to the extent that we can help. And President Trump needs to be reelected. Whatever happens in the House, yes, play in the primaries. You're going to have good pro-crypto Democrats, good pro-crypto Republicans. That's a very long game that's getting played and is going to be played every 2 years, basically from now until the end of time. But the Senate and the White House need to flip. And anyone right now that is engaging with the Biden administration is essentially just negotiating their own surrender at the moment that we finally have political leverage.
Yeah.
And I'm banging my head against the table, talking to my colleagues and friends. I respect them, but it's like we're trying to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory by engaging right now. And I think the name of the game the next couple of months is to just slam the brakes on any Senate bills or Senate, responses to the Fit 21 bill that was passed out of the House last month. Anything that has senators
tell us about that bill.
Anything that has senators, it's basically market structure. So how do the centralized exchanges get regulated? How are the assets that they're trading defined? Who has jurisdiction between the SEC and the CFTC? So kind of like wonky stuff, but essentially, okay, how do we ensure that there's never another FTX? So how does Coinbase, Kraken, Gemini, Anchorage, how do they all get regulated? How do the big financial firms like Fidelity and the banks, how do they interface with the industry? That will be a positive development. But if we get the details wrong and it creates too much centralization pressure or creates basically very high regulatory hurdles that essentially enshrine the current market leaders as the permanent ones, that's not great. And that's the direction that I think.
And is that House bill that passed good?
It was great that it passed. And it was great that we were able to finally get some Democrats on board and kind of force the issue upon them. Behind closed doors, nobody likes the bill in industry. Now, I can say that because I'm friends with all of them. And I already have a reputation as a bit of a wild card down here.
Yeah, it was funny.
They will never admit that in public because they're trying to be very diplomatic and respectful, quite frankly, for the staffers that have worked their ass off for many years on this and doing it quietly and diplomatically and politely. And by the way, I would do the same thing. And I think they deserve all the credit in the world for having gotten it to this point. That doesn't mean it's a good bill. In my opinion, it was a good messaging bill. And The only reason we're even talking about a potential Senate alternative that could get conferenced in is because Chuck Schumer knows that they're going to lose. They know that this is going to cost them the Senate, and it should and it will. And I don't think that anyone within our industry that's giving them an out at this point is being very intelligent about the long-term repercussions for the industry. This will not get better if Joe Biden is reelected or President Warren is reelected. So I think that has to color the discussion around anything that comes out of the Senate. Anything that Senator Stabenow touches this year, hard pass. Absolutely not. I'll be shouting from the rooftops, kill the bill. There's other folks that I think operate in good faith, but you know what it's like down here. People want to declare victory for passing something.
Totally.
And the worst ideas are bipartisan.
Mm-hmm.
So I would rather wait until we've basically either secured unconditional surrender from the Democrats, which will never happen for political reasons, or until we've swung control in DC to the red team.
So that dovetails very well with a question I had for you, which is you've had very public, transparent debates with people in the industry about what the strategy should be. Mm-hmm. The conventional approach of basically, the conventional approach of basically any industry in Washington is saying, we're going to come to town, we're going to spend 50% left, 50% right, and we're going to build sort of bipartisan agreement around our issues. Yeah, maybe one party slightly better for us, but it's very risk laden to put all our eggs in one basket. You're proposing something pretty radical, which is aligning the industry much more aggressively with the center right. What's the thought process behind that, and make your case?
Well, I think I just made the case for why I think it's important in terms of like long-term outcomes. I don't necessarily disagree that this should be nonpartisan in the future. If you talk to someone even like Whip Emmer, who just spoke at one of the big industry conferences in Texas a couple weeks ago, he said this should stay, or it should be nonpartisan. It should be bipartisan, whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. It's just new technology, right? We should have rules of the road for the centralized players and the folks that have outsized influence or that are handling customer funds or that are, integrating with the financial system. No one disagrees with that. It's the philosophical divide between those that pretend that they want to do that, but really are just trying to cloak their solutions in a censorship regime and like an oversight regime that will capture everything and kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater. And then those that are actually serious about let's sandbox where the regulation should be so that we don't make a mistake that essentially cripples innovation here, and we can have a moment similar to the 90s open internet that protects innovation here. So what I'm really talking about is, we need like our Section 230 moment for these bills. And until that happens, sorry, like it's war. And I think, look, I would love to give myself credit for like kind of pushing like the side that's winning right now. But there are many, many more people in the industry that are on the other side of where I sit politically, and they're working their team too, right? Mark Cuban was just at an event with Coinbase yesterday. He dialed in and he said he's talking to senators, governors, congresspeople, the White House staffers, whoever he can get in touch with. You guys are killing yourselves with this approach that you have. And the message just isn't getting through for whatever reason. And the way that I look at it is that's not on me. Let's going back to Omar Little. What's the classic line that he has from the courtroom scene? That's up to y'all, really.
Yeah.
Like that's not my team. That's not my problem.
Yeah.
And by the way, me winning the argument, to the extent people think that I'm winning the argument and pulling voices and pulling alignment in my direction, the red team's direction, that doesn't mean that this is partisan. It means one team in Washington, D.C. is offsides on this issue, and they're losing all the swing voters because my team's arguments are better.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that the other side of this industry and the career Democrats, Mike Novogratz and I will go out for a beer, lunch. It's funny. We actually had lunch the day that there was a big Stand With Crypto event and a bunch of like congressional meetings in September. And no one's going to accuse him, Novo, being a Republican, right? And he's as frustrated as anyone else. That doesn't mean he's going to flip and start,
put on the MAGA hat.
Yeah, he's not going to put on a MAGA hat and like start stumping for Trump. But all these guys are frustrated, and I think there's kind of like a resignation that's set in, even if no one will admit it publicly, that the red team needs to sweep, and just we need to send a strong message as an industry, and to the extent that we can be part of that red wave. I think a lot of people don't like it just personally based on their politics, but if they just wear the professional hat for a minute, I think everybody recognizes that if there's a moment to actually influence DC permanently, it's to have a couple names in our little black book and then cross them off in November. And we're going to. And I think that ultimately is going to be helpful for the country. I think it's going to ensure that the U.S. remains in the driver's seat in tech and finance, which, if we lose financial services, we're going to have a lot of problems, right? I mean, we talk about the manufacturing base in the country, but like if you start like conceding core areas of tech and finance to other parts of the globe, we're going to have real problems economically. And, I'm happy to mix it up with folks on Twitter and for the next 30 days or however long it matters, and have a couple of food or fist fights virtually, if that's what it takes to make sure that we don't just shoot ourselves in the foot as a country.
So crack open the sociology behind the scenes of the tech industry for me right now. It feels like there's been a vibe shift, I hate that term, over the last few months specifically. What's been going on behind the scenes? I mean, more tech guys have pictures of President Trump than it feels like they have had in a long time. And what's your own personal narrative for what's going on?
I just post my own every day.
Yeah, that's right.
Maybe that's just like the feed that you're seeing.
Yeah.
I think part of it is just based on how lopsided the outcomes have been. I mean, this is the first time in modern history that we've had an A/B test.
Yeah. And
you can say, like, was the 4 years under President Trump better? Or was the 4 years under Biden better? And even the blue team's like, it's a tough comparison, right? And so I think, there's a series of issues, and you can literally, I mean, I would like to see someone do a pie chart of Kamala Harris's tweets, the subject matter. There's only like 3 things that they talk about at this point that are winning issues. They're losing on basically everything except for 3 issues that everybody knows about on social policy, or January 6th, or convicted felon, whatever, and I think those are the same things that are coming from Silicon Valley progressives, almost out of like desperation, because they feel like they're losing. I've made the comparison to, generally speaking, I think that, New Yorkers are kind but not nice. And folks in tech in San Francisco are nice but not kind. Yeah. That's a gross generalization. I wouldn't apply it to everybody, but for the politically involved, I definitely think it's true. I mentioned Novo, Fred Wilson, Albert. These are people I respect a lot. Yeah. Even Mark Cuban, who I mix it up with on Twitter. I had a very famous, kind of back and forth with him over the weekend. But I also was talking to him yesterday, and just actually debating the substance of the issue. And neither of us really cares about the kayfabe, like WrestleMania type entertainment from over the weekend. On the other hand, you have the tech gods of Silicon Valley that are like win at all costs, still trying to run, I think, a cancellation playbook from 10 or 15 years ago for people having the audacity to cross the line. And you saw this at the David Sachs event in particular. You had some, and I'm not going to name names because I've already done it on Twitter, and I'm going to give them.
You got in trouble enough.
No, I didn't get. No, trust me. Yeah. I not only did I not get in trouble, and I'm going to get away with everything, but I just don't care because I'm on the right side of this. Because there's certain folks that have been bullying tech founders behind the scenes, or other smaller investors behind the scenes, and resorting to just straight up goon tactics to stifle anything that is not pro-blue policies,
like
politics. I mean, they'll call your investors. They'll strategize about like media ops to write hit pieces. It's like this stuff happens. And I mean, I'm not saying that I didn't provoke them because, I heard about this stuff and I called out the bullies and they don't like that.
So Silicon Valley Bolsheviks
sorry, the real Bolsheviks of Silicon Valley is my preferred.
Yeah.
I have the graphic ready to go if they want to keep going with this, because I will win the mimetic warfare versus the 60 to 70-year-olds that are currently against me on this.
And it is mostly the older guys.
Yeah. Yep. Mostly the older.
Because every young tech guy I meet is like far right.
What's that?
Every young tech guy I meet is like far right.
Well, yeah, definitely libertarian leaning. Yeah, I think that's true. But I think obviously I've had conversations about this with other people in the industry that are customers, that are partners, with my team, with my investors, because they're like, "We love you, man, but can we like take it down to maybe here?" And my answer has been no. Yeah. Like the strategy here is breach the blue wall of tech. Yeah. And there's different levels to why I think that's important. One, I don't like bullies. And I think it's important that we have a clean fight and like a good political process. Two, it's fun. I'd be lying if I said it wasn't fun. But three, and most importantly, and this actually kind of goes back to my recommendation for folks listening, if they haven't caught your episode with Josh Simon, I think it is so important that the blue wall of tech is breached, because President Trump is going to win re-election. And we cannot, as a country, afford to have a tech community that is adversarial to the White House again. It will be a disaster for us from like a foreign policy and like an economic competitiveness standpoint. So to the extent that like a couple of mean tweets from me and calling out, like, look, yeah, I'll use every tool in the arsenal. AOC wears a dress because she's pretty. I bully people because I'm physically imposing, right? If they strike first, right? Fair game, as far as I'm concerned, to win that larger battle of, look, I won't attack you, provided I don't hear that you're bullying people for going to the David Sachs event and calling their investors. I think that's pretty reasonable.
Yeah.
Okay. If I do hear about that, or if you try to come for me, I'm going to take you into the deep water. And I've kind of made my bed at this point and drawn that red line, both publicly and privately, with some of these folks. And that's not because I'm this hero or Captain America or anything like that. I just feel so strongly that the needs to end. And that third most important point, we cannot have a 90-10 tech community when we already have a 90-10 academic community and a 90-10 DC bureaucracy community. Tech needs to be neutral. It needs to be fair game for everybody. And we need to actually kind of level up the discussions right now. And counterintuitively, if that means that I need to just take it to the most, WrestleMania, like South Park, type of satire and critiques and attacks, I'm not above doing that for the greater goal and greater mission. And if you look at what I've been saying and what I've been doing through that lens, it seems like I'm not unhinged, but actually being like very thoughtful about like when to pick these battles, even if they're very colorful, but they're colorful for effect. And so I hope that ends. That's my biggest hope, is that we can have a like clean election and a fair fight where people feel like they can actually advocate for their own interest. And I kind of feel like I've personally been in a unique situation here, because when I went down to the Mar-a-Lago event and I was up on stage with Trump, people don't realize this.
Can you explain what that event was? Because I think that's the prelude to the...
Yeah, it basically was the domino, right? Yeah. I would argue. And so he basically, Trump sold these NFTs, these digital trading cards, for his fans. Made some money. If you bought a certain threshold, you got invited to a private banquet. And if you bought a lot of them, you'd get invited to like a VIP reception beforehand. A friend of mine in the industry bought a ton of them. He's like, Selkis, I can't go because I have this longstanding like family commitment. I just can't miss. I need you to take this because I want to desperately go, but you're the most active person that would actually like engage with the red team. And you can actually maybe, see someone important down there and do whatever. Maybe you can meet them. And so, we got down there, and I guess someone from his team must have slipped a couple of names for some of the more, the higher profile entrepreneurs that were down there, because remember, this was like a lot of his fans, not necessarily crypto people. They were like fans that bought the NFTs. Mm-hmm. And so I guess there was two of us where I guess the team slipped our names to him. And it was funny. I was actually sitting next to a journalist for an off the record conversation because he saw me, and I was like, don't dox me. I'll sit next to you at dinner because I'm not ready to be like public about this yet. I'm just kind of behind the scenes right now. And I'm like in the middle of a bite of salad, and I hear my name called by the president on stage in a banquet hall of 800 people. He's like, come on up here. and I thought he was just going to shake her hand or whatever. And then he's like, why don't you say a few words? So basically I'm like forced to give this like 60-second like impromptu speech that like has to be supportive, but not necessarily an endorsement because I haven't talked to my team, my board, whatever. And I know it's going to immediately go viral. And sure enough, it wasn't just the 60-second video, but first of all, the fact that it happened and like that moment was captured. Then there was the video, but then there was also like a handshake that someone had caught between me and President Trump that we were able to use to great effect over the course of the next few weeks and essentially bully the Democrats into basically moving their votes on a couple of the bills that were going to up for discussion at the time. So
you shaking President Trump's hand, how does make you feel, basically, right?
Right.
Democrat.
No, exactly. And I mean, it was a great picture too because I was saying something, so it looked cool. But that moment almost like accidentally liberated me because like, all right, well, I'm out now. I'm certainly not going to backtrack. I'm going to double down, and we're going to try to use this to shift the Overton window as much as we can, right? And so that happened, and then the David Sachs event happened, and that was, I think, the real kind of initial breach of the blue wall. The most interesting thing about the David Sachs event, though, I think they raised like $12 million right in the heart of San Francisco. It was actually, his house is actually like a block away from the Getty House, which is where like a bunch of the big Democratic fundraisers over the years, like very famous like Obama, Hillary, Biden fundraisers have been held. But I was joking that we literally have the high ground because it's like a block up from them. But the coolest, so that was just one note that I thought was funny. But the other thing that was wild is I had security for the day just because we weren't sure if there was going to be protesters at the event. And obviously I've already been public about my support. So I told people I was going so that to the extent that there were any press inquiries, that attention could get focused on me. And I'd almost like run interference for any of the other entrepreneurs that were there that had similar headline risk concerns. So I tweeted about it, had the security, and going into the event, our SUV kind of pulls in, driver pulls in, and there's a crowd of people on the corner. And I was like, okay, here's the protesters. And as we get a little bit closer, you see all the signs and you see the flags and you see this is 10-1 pro-Trump, not anti. And I couldn't believe it. So I actually rolled down the window and I kind of like gave one of these, like fist bump. Roars. There were supporters there that were literally cheering the folks in tech that were going to support Trump at the event. It was wild. And so I think there's like a really unique moment. And that is what is sparking some of the desperate tactics from some of these, real Bolsheviks of Silicon Valley. And I think it's somewhat to be expected, but it's a trickle at first. It is going to be a flood soon of high profile people. And I think those same folks are going to realize that they're outnumbered and they better start keeping their mouth shut because it's not breaking their way this year. And they are going to start incurring some personal, social, and political costs themselves if they resort to cancellation tactics. That's my thinking anyway. And we'll see where the chips fall. But like I said, I've already kind of, the die is cast in terms of some of those high profile fights that I've engaged with. I don't regret any of them. There's a reason for them. I think it's a smart, maybe not a smart fight personally in the short term, but I think it's the right fight based on what we need to do. Sorry, and the last thing I'll say is crypto is unique And I feel a little safer doing that because it's so black and white,
right,
for our industry. Not true for the rest of tech. So what I hope is that the crypto industry can be like the red wedge into the blue wall of general tech in Silicon Valley.
Yeah. Give me a taxonomy a little bit about that shift that's happening in Silicon Valley. Like if 100 business leaders are going to, pull the lever for Trump and actively support him, is it part of a broader right shift that they're having in their personal ideology? Is it just how bad Biden's been? Is it pecuniary interest with their industry? Obviously it's all those things, but like what are the relative percentages and categories? Do you think that there's an overall, like, is this durable in the long term? Like, are these guys ever going to go back blue under normal politics?
The parties shift over time, right? Like the left has moved so far left. I think I voted for Rand Paul in 2016, Rand or Rond, or I wrote someone in 2016. And I was one of those voters that people don't believe actually exists, where I was like going like eeny, meeny, miny, mo at the ballot box. And I think I ultimately chose Biden just because of how chaotic 2020 was. And I think there are a lot of folks like me that are looking at just get the government the hell away from me, and who is going to be better in that on that one axis. And like I said, we had an A/B test, or 4 years in one, 3.5 of another. And the realization that I've made, and I think this analogy holds up pretty well with other folks that I speak with that are at events like that. In 2020, it wasn't clear to me whether Donald Trump was the cancer or the chemo. In 2024, it is so blindingly obvious that he's the chemo, and we need another round, unfortunately. And then we can talk about 2028 and generation change and the next generation of leaders and all the things that you're doing that I think are so important. But we've got 4 more years of one or the other. It couldn't be a sharper contrast. And there's an obvious choice right now.
So the last thing that I want to talk about is, what does the crypto industry want? So suppose you sweep, you get a Senate, House, and an administration that is pro-crypto. What is the basket of things that need to happen to finally, end this war between the U.S. federal government and the cryptocurrency industry? And what's the, not moonshot, but what's the 75th percentile of what you guys are hoping to achieve?
Regulate centralized exchanges and custodians that are holding other people's funds and processing payments. Make sure that illicit activity is cracked down upon, and that there are tools law enforcement and our kind of foreign intelligence agencies need to make sure that crypto isn't used to undermine our security either here or abroad. Protect civil liberties. So you need to allow people to custody their own assets and hold them as if they could hold physical cash or physical gold. There's nothing wrong with that. It's enshrined in the Constitution. And it's inconvenient for some bureaucrats that, this technology undermines their warrantless surveillance regime. That's true, but it doesn't mean that what they're doing is currently constitutional. And again, this tech, I think, is important to preserve in that realm. So that's probably the biggest ask, which is like, get your hands off our because it's constitutionally protected. Stablecoin legislation. I think we need clear rules for how tokenized US dollars or treasuries are actually put on chain. Are they fully reserved? What are the banking integrations? What are the capital requirements for financial firms that engage in both fractional banking on the one hand, and then also have a crypto component? Because that's a very dangerous combination, as we saw with FTX and like our own credit crisis.
Yeah.
But I'd say like as a result, crypto is much more conservative in terms of like reserve ratios in general. The frauds blow up, but we didn't have any issues with decentralized finance lending platforms. The liquidations happen if people get overextended, but they happen automatically. And we've not had any kind of cascading major issues in decentralized finance, decentralized lending in particular. And then I think it's basically creating a regulatory sandbox, hopefully one where we lead, but can do it in concert with other like-minded regulators, that allows for some safe harbors and some, opportunities for especially smaller applications and upstarts to operate unimpeded and, I kind of think that we should be regulating things in this country that are systemically important, not the 3-person team out of Stanford that's dabbling with stuff. I can't tell you how many things I have not tried or that I'm legally restricted from trying. The freaking prediction markets. The Trump campaign actually has Polymarket as one of their first polls that they look at when they do the regular polling reviews. I've seen it. It's literally on the cover, the prediction market. And the president himself has said that he likes that and he thinks that they're higher signal because of all the shenanigans that he's dealt with in polling in the past. You can't bet on the election here. You cannot use Polymarket in the US. This happens with dozens of applications within crypto where you will literally look at the terms of service and you'll be geofenced or geo-blocked, and it'll say, "We apologize, but the service is not available in North Korea, Iran, Cuba, and the United States." Right?
One of these things is not like the others.
This is common sense stuff, man. We're not asking to move mountains here. We're literally, I'll go back to my analogy, we're literally looking for a Section 230 moment and a moment of rare common sense. I think that moment will come soon, but only once Liz Warren and her influence is so thoroughly repudiated and people realize down here how cancerous she is for the future of the progressive movement and Democratic Party, that, you're never going to knock her from her seat in Massachusetts. But if you hurt every single one of her friends in the process in November, that's about as good as it's going to get. And that, that's, I think, good for all of us.
Yeah. What, I want to give you a chance to just shout out some MVPs.
So I'm on so many watch lists right now, as people if you're looking at my face, trust me, I'm probably already on posters in many of your offices.
Oh, for sure.
Dartboards and, and much worse, I'm sure.
But I'm more curious where is there that nice heart emoji around it? What are the MVP offices who have been some of the real champions in the House and Senate that just want to give you a chance to shout out that have, you think, really taken the time to understand the industry and have been real champions willing to expend political capital to
I think there's a lot. I think many or most are Republicans. The pro-crypto Democrats have an uphill battle, but there are some of them. I mentioned Richie Torres, Kirsten Gillibrand on the Senate side. Has really stuck her neck out. And, she's only going to go so far, but she can only go so far because she gets pressure from the left flank anytime that she says anything even remotely positive or as part of a compromise. I think most of them are Republicans, though. Warren Davidson in Ohio is very good. The MVP, I think, for the industry is probably Whip Tom Emmer. He's just right over the target on so much of what he talks about. On the Senate side, probably J.D. Vance and Haggerty, and obviously, Senator Lummis has just been, at the vanguard of this issue. I respect Senator Lummis a lot. I don't want her staff or her to think that was an oversight. I just think that Senators Vance and Haggerty are going to be pushing much further into let's get this right instead of done quickly. Let's get it right, even if it takes another year and even if it takes a bruising election to do so. So that's kind of where I align. But I'd say, other people have been progressively better. And obviously I do share my colleagues' goal to make this nonpartisan in the future. And that's encouraging, but it's ultimately is going to come from the younger senators and the younger reps. And that door will open much wider if it's seen as more politically dangerous to be in the Liz Warren camp than against.
Is it as simple as this is maybe?
I mean, it almost sounds like a caricature of or like a Disney villain, or the way that you'll hear me and others in the industry talk about Liz Warren. And I mentioned my annual report, but there's 40 pages on policy that outline exactly who she has influenced and where and how. And we've heard it explicitly, right? We had a meeting with Leader Jeffries in September, and he flat out said, if you want this to be a bipartisan bill, you need to get Representative Waters on board. And a few of us brought up, well, Waters is getting called from the White House staffers who are Liz Warren alumni. So she's over here running information ops and planting negative pieces in the New York Times and, just running a defamation campaign that's been multi-years in the making. She's got all of her minions running around the entire financial regulatory apparatus and the White House. And those calls are coming from those minions to the House leaders on the Democratic side. It's like full Ouroboros, right? Like It's just, so we brought that up explicitly with Jeffries, and I actually think that he will be a good leader, and he'll probably be speaker someday. And I actually think that would be a good thing. I happen to like him, even though I probably shouldn't say that since I'm on the red team now. But I think that he essentially was like, you got to let a little time pass from FTX, right? And so the longer that we separate ourselves from that crisis, which is still imprinted in everybody's mind. Doesn't matter that this was a Democratic super donor that was trying to screw all of us in the process. We still we've lost like 3 times over because of this guy. But time will pass. We'll get some political wins this year at the ballot box. And I think that combination sets us up really, really well for 2025. And more importantly, it'll help people like me get back to building, stay the hell out of the city forever. My goal in 2025 is to never come here again. And you
got to get the bills passed. Once you do that,
that's what I mean. As soon as they're passed, as soon as we've got our Section 230 moment, I'm out back to building. And I think a lot of people kind of feel similarly. So let's win the fight that's here. The fight was brought to us, but we'll finish it and we'll get it done well. And fortunately, I do think things are moving in the right direction. We just need to knock a couple people off their axis.
For our members only section, I'm going to ask Ryan a couple of questions about some threats he sees on the horizon, as well as some, dirty secrets about Silicon Valley. In order to become a member, you can go to YouTube and you can become either a truther or a statesman. You get the episodes 24 hours early and you can get the special members only content. Once again, that's truther or statesman. Just go to our YouTube channel, American Moment, to do that. So, if you're listening to this, you're almost certainly a highly sophisticated news consumer, but even the most dogged of DC politicos need a news aggregator to help them out. We're big fans of Upward News here at American Moment. Ari David has actually been a previous guest on this show. We highly recommend you check out that episode. But Upward.news is a way that our team keeps in touch with all of the crazy news stories going on around the world. Your Twitter feed is not necessarily 100% reliable to get a proper cross-section of everything going on that matters. Upward News is a fantastic young media startup that is really putting together fantastic newsletters and social media content that helps people digest the news, especially if you're tired of being on the phone with your parents and explaining news stories to them multiple times a week because you're the politico in the family. I highly recommend encouraging them to follow Upward.news. They do a free 5-minute daily email that you can sign up for at readupward.com, or even better, www.ihatefakenews.com. It's time for a palate cleanse from politicos, punch bowls, and pucks. Try Upward News today. We highly recommend it. Ari's an incredibly smart patriot, and they're a new player on the block focused on cutting through the noise and delivering smart analysis. Please check them out. Ryan, where can people keep up with everything you're doing and find you on the great white internet?
This is the great finale.
Yeah.
At 2bit idiot on Twitter.
My handle.
My handle started as a Reddit throwaway account because I was worried about the social consequences of being active in crypto way back in 2013. And I had a South Park avatar that I made on South Park Studios, and I called myself the 2-bit idiot. It stuck. And I'm never changing it, regardless of how much time I spend down here. So all spelled out, one word, 2-bit idiot.
And for anyone in this town that wants to work with you politically, is there a particular way that they should reach out? I have open DMs on Twitter. That's been really effective. That's how so many of my friendships have started. Different virtual meet cutes from my various mix-ups over the past. But I'm pretty reasonable, and I have a lot of good relationships left, right, and center. And I come to people from the front, which I think people
appreciate. So even if you're on the blue team and you want to catch up, happy to if you can engage with a Twitter handle.
Most of the blue team people who listen to this show are journalists.
Exactly.
Ryan, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you very much.
I really enjoy when people don't take themselves too seriously. So to make your Twitter handle, or I suppose X handle, 2-Bit Idiot is pretty funny. Be sure to follow Ryan and watch him get into fights and sometimes literal threats of violence against people who are messing with him on the internet. He's a ton of fun. Really enjoyed getting to know him. He kept on name dropping it, so I figure I will too. Josh Steinman's episode, which is a bonding point for us and a mutual friend, is fantastic. If you want to explore some other technologically relevant issues, be sure to go to AmericanMoment.org and find the backlog of this podcast. Rate and review us, 5 stars only on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify. Go to YouTube and subscribe. You can become a truther or a statesman. And in general, thank you guys for all of the support. We really do appreciate it. It's a chaotic season for us. We're planning National Conservatism Conference, which we hope all of you will join for. That's July 8th, 9th, and 10th. Be sure to reach out to us if you'd like a discount code for the conference, but we'll have everyone from Steve Bannon to JD Vance to Josh Hawley, Roger Marshall, Eric Schmidt, Stephen Miller, lots of alumni of this podcast, but some of the leading luminaries on the right that will help us determine what must be done with the power that national conservatives are gaining across this country and across the world. Everything is crazy all the time, but we're grateful for all of your support. So we'll see you next week. Moment of Truth is an American Moment podcast taped at the Conservative Partnership Campus Studios and is produced by Jake Mercier, Jared Cummings, Tiffany Kutris, and Matthew Pearson. Our intro song is A Minor Struggle by Ryan Selkis, and our website is AmericanMoment.org.